Hey guys, it's towniesimbuilds here, and welcome back to another episode of The Sims 4 Real Lore. In this series, we explore fascinating destinations from around the world, shrouded in history, mystery, and sometimes a little bit of spookiness. Today, we dive into the incredibly infamous mystery of teacher Emilie Sagee, whose story and credibility has been in question for well over a century. Reportedly, Emilie Sagee had her life rattled by a very mysterious double, who plagued her professional career for well over 15 years. But who or what exactly was this strange ghostly twin? Before diving into today's video, I do want to preface this by saying that there are several languages in this video that unfortunately I am not very well versed in, so I will do my best to pronounce these different names for you guys. On another note, this video will cover topics regarding the supernatural and paranormal, so please keep that in mind while watching. Starting off today's tale, we travel back to the early 1800s in the city of Dijon, France. Allegedly, on the day of January 3rd, 1813, a woman by the name of Emilie Sagee was born. Now, the mystery of Emilie Sagee begins at the very start of our timeline, as public records do not indicate a woman named Emilie Sagee was actually born on this date and location. However, a woman by the name of 𝗪𝗛𝗧𝗖𝗛𝗡𝗏 was born on this day. Some theorize that the first name Emilie may have become a derivative of the name Octavie, but we will get into that very shortly. Overall, not much is really known about the childhood of Emilie Sagee, but her story does come into fruition during her early adolescent years. Roughly at the age of 16, Emilie would begin her very first teaching position. This would launch a career that would sustain her for a very great portion of her life. So much, in fact, that she would actually hold a total of about 19 different teaching positions over a course of 16 years. However, as impressive as this may sound on a resume, this constant shift in employment was not without a very eerie explanation. According to multiple sources, Emilie had actually changed schools 19 times during her career as a teacher. Unfortunately, this would entail that Emilie would actually change schools more than once every year, roughly from the ages of 16 to 32. While constant job changes are normally marked by poor performance, Emilie's case was actually quite the opposite. In fact, Emilie had a very great reputation as a teacher, who was said to be very knowledgeable, well-liked, and most importantly, very kind and attentive to her students. Unfortunately, there is little to no information on the grades or subject matters Emilie taught, but her positive reviews as an educator remained, regardless of whatever school she at last departed from. Now, the mystery of Emilie Sagee gets even murkier. Unfortunately, the names and locations of the schools she had formerly worked at are completely unknown. However, by the year of 1845, most sources agree that Emilie Sagee had last been employed in the small village of 𝗪𝗪𝗧, located in the modern-day country of Latvia. Her last place of employment was a school by the name of the Pensionnat of Neuwelcke, where she would hold a teaching position from the years of 1845 to 1846. Unfortunately, the school itself is also part of the mystery. There is no definite confirmed location for the pensionnat to this day. However, multiple sources, including a Latvian website, provide actual GPS coordinates that could possibly indicate the school's former site. Now, if you do in fact input these coordinates into Google Maps, you will be met with a very eerie sight. We are in what appears to be 𝗪𝗪𝗧, Latvia, in a very rural countryside. You will notice an older red brick or red wood building towards the left, an older, darker shed type of structure towards the back, and also what looks to be the remains of a roof towards the front. Furthermore, there have been some supposed artistic portrayals of what the pensionnat may have looked like. This does include this one particular oil painting, which was shared on the same Latvian website that provided the coordinates. Using a very rough translation of the page, the Latvian website does seem to be a factual resource, denoting specific historical sites throughout its country. Hopefully this does provide some credibility into our investigation, but unfortunately, we can't really know for certain. Anyways, the pensionnat during its operation was noted to be a very high-end boarding school for young girls. Based on reports, the school catered to young girls of wealthy and/or noble families. And, fortunately for us, we do have some very important information from a very prominent alumni, one that actually confirmed both her attendance and her experiences with teacher Emilie Sagee. But we will get into that a little later on in today's tale. Starting her new job at the pensionnat boarding school, it is possible that Emilie Sagee had gone under a name change from what was formerly listed as 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗖𝗛𝗏. Formerly, her listed last name having two E's at the end differed from its public record spelling, which listed one E followed by the letter T. Most notably, however, was her first name, Emilie, differing entirely from the original public record first name of 𝗧𝗛𝗡𝗚𝗏. Now, I do want to note that there are several interesting explanations as to why her last known name and her official birth name do not match. Some speculate that Emilie did this to simplify her name, making it easier to pronounce for those not familiar with the French language. Others speculate, however, that this was done to protect her identity, especially after the very strange phenomenon surrounding Emilie herself. Alternatively, others say the name had simply been misconstrued over the years. Now, diving into Emilie's time at the pensionnat, her time as a teacher was fairly normal. There wasn't any trouble or disturbance, and things were running fairly smoothly. This period, based on reports, lasted briefly, only for about 3 weeks to a month's time. However, after some time passes, both students and faculty alike begin noticing some very odd and unsettling occurrences. Based on reports, what appeared to be a ghostly copy of Emilie Sagee would manifest out of thin air, normally within direct vicinity of Emilie herself. Students began seeing this very creepy double appear, often during very normal everyday activities. For example, Emilie would be writing a lesson on the chalkboard, where her strange ghostly twin would appear at her side, mimicking all of her motions. Even more unsettling, however, was the fact that Emilie never came into contact with this double. In other words, she could not see it, touch it, hear it, nor could she speak to it. This being seemed to be completely disconnected from Emilie herself without her awareness or control. Another incident occurred one day while Emilie was repairing a dress worn by one of her students. Reportedly, the student stood still in her dress as Emilie proceeded to fix the fabric with her sewing kit. When, all of a sudden, Emilie's ghostly double appeared right in front of the student herself. The double then proceeded to hunch over and sew, mimicking the real-life Emilie as she assisted the young girl. Some reports say that upon seeing this very strange and unsettling apparition, the young girl then fainted. Unfortunately, the sudden and strange appearance of this double also had very negative consequences on Emilie. Many report that upon seeing Emilie's ghostly twin appear, the real Emilie would suffer gravely. Witnesses say she would become extremely lethargic and unresponsive in the double's presence, and only upon its disappearance would she then return to her normal self. To make matters worse, some reports also state that Emilie also began acting odd, even without the presence of her double. Despite being a generally calm and friendly person, there were times when Emilie acted in a way that some sources describe as nervously anxious, as if troubled by onsets of stress and possible paranoia. Curiously enough, however, Emilie seemed to be completely unaware of her double's presence. She would either dismiss it or express confusion when others began questioning her about the very strange occurrence. Despite these very unsettling apparitions, however, there would be one very infamous event that would unfold that would both fascinate and frighten the students and faculty. During an embroidery class on a summer's day, a total of about 42 young girls were in attendance. Another teacher had been instructing the class when at some point she had to leave the room, reportedly to speak with another staff member outside of the classroom. The girls were then left alone in the room, continuing to sew at their desks while also having a view of the school's courtyard, just outside the classroom windows. There, teacher Emilie Sagee was seen tending to the flowers, seemingly unaware that the girls were watching her. Suddenly, after very little time had passed since their instructor left the room, the girls were shocked to see Emilie, or at least what appeared to be Emilie, seated at the front of the room in their instructor's chair. The students were in a very frightened sense of awe as they continued to watch their teacher outside in the garden, while her ghostly copy remained in the room. Reportedly, 2 young girls summoned the courage to approach the apparition, who remained completely still and silent. Upon reaching out their hands and making contact with Emilie's double, the girls described a very eerie sensation. They described the experience as touching something very airy and ephemeral, like the feel of a spiderweb or light fabric. Naturally, the girls shared their very unsettling experience with their instructors, and at some point proceeded to confront Emilie Sagee herself. However, Emilie continued to deny knowledge of this apparition, and furthermore expressed confusion about this very odd event. Some variations of this account, however, claim that Emilie had actually looked up into the classroom window and noticed that the girl's instructor was missing. As a result, Emilie was said to express dismay, wondering if the girls were misbehaving or if they needed potential help with their schoolwork. It is in this exact moment when her double would reportedly appear without Emilie's knowledge or control. Unfortunately, as time passed, the stories of Emilie's ghostly double spread to the families of the young girls, and in due time, the school witnessed a very noticeable drop in attendance, with parents withdrawing their children from the campus. Ultimately, Emilie too had been forced to resign, closing her chapter at the pensionnat. In fact, this would now be the final 19th school that would conclude her known teaching career. To this day, the Pensionnat of Neuwelcke remains to be her last known place of employment, with her whereabouts shrouded in mystery. Despite a lot of the interesting details regarding Emilie Sagee's case, it is still highly disputed for multiple reasons. The location of the pensionnat boarding school is unconfirmed, with the original campus seemingly defunct and no longer intact. The Google Map images of 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗪𝗛 remain as the only reported evidence of this historical site. Likewise, the French public records confirming the identity of Emilie Sagee are up for debate. As mentioned, our closest match is a woman named 𝗧𝗛𝗪𝗧𝗖𝗛𝗡𝗚 Sagee, who was born roughly in the same year as Emilie, although her first name is noticeably different and her last name presents an alternative spelling. On that note, unfortunately, we still do not have any records of the other schools Emilie Sagee had previously worked at, with the pensionnat being the only one. Fortunately, many of the accounts shared in this tale were confirmed by a woman named Julie van Guldenstubbe, who attended the pensionnat boarding school at age 13 as a student of Emilie Sagee herself. We can confirm that Mrs. Guldenstubbe is in fact a real person, as she belongs to a prominent Baltic Swedish noble family with known ancestry dating back to the early 1700s. In a very interesting twist of fate, Julie's brother Johann Ludwig also had a very fervent passion for the paranormal, and studied a phenomenon known as ghost writing. He was known to host several spiritual events and organizations throughout Paris, France. Together, both Julie and her brother Johann Ludwig would publish their research in a book entitled Thoughts of the Spirits from Beyond the Grave in the year 1875. Given the surge of spiritual interest in the Victorian era, and her experiences with her former teacher Emilie Sagee, it is said that Julie eagerly accompanied her brother, documenting his studies along the way. Apart from this publication, Julie would also divulge most of her recollections of Emilie Sagee's ghostly double, sharing them with an author by the name of Robert Dale Owen. The stories of Emilie Sagee that we know today mostly derive from Julie's accounts, which were published in Robert's 1860 book entitled Footfalls on the Boundary of Another World. Emilie Sagee's ghostly double has mystified and disturbed paranormal enthusiasts for years. However, a common thread in Emilie's case is the use of the term doppelganger. By definition, the word doppelganger derives from German, translating to double goer. As an important note, doppelgangers are typically not classified as ghosts. However, they are noted as separate beings, defined as apparitions that take on the exact appearance of a living person. Unfortunately, across several cultures and works of fiction, seeing one's doppelganger has been associated with misfortune, illness, and even death. One of the most popular and disturbing cases of a doppelganger's appearance involved the impending death of American President Abraham Lincoln, who reported seeing a double reflection in his mirror. Reportedly, he was stunned to see a reflection of himself, accompanied by another version of his reflection that appeared more gaunt and pale. Upon hearing Abraham's experience, Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd, feared that this could be a potentially dangerous omen, famously concluding that Abraham would not live to complete his second presidential term. Unfortunately, Abraham Lincoln's demise would ensue in the year of 1865, where he would be shot and killed by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. As Mary Todd predicted, Lincoln had just barely started his second term when his time was tragically cut short. Despite this more recent historical example, the mysterious and dark lore surrounding doppelgangers dates back to ancient civilizations, with references in Egyptian, Norse, Celtic, and Native American belief systems. Across nearly all of these cultures, the doppelganger has been interpreted to be an eerie counterpart to its living embodiment, sometimes suggesting a darker malevolence. This can roughly be associated with what is known as the evil twin trope in modern fiction. However, some cultures suggest that doppelgangers simply exist on a different timeline or spiritual plane in close proximity to our own, which may be comparable to Emilie Sagee's case. The actions that the doppelganger replicated from Emilie do suggest a very similar phenomenon. Likewise, the negative physical symptoms Emilie experienced do reflect the established lore of the doppelganger's presence. However, the question still does remain: what exactly is this doppelganger, and how did it come into existence? For almost 200 years, several theories have attempted to explain the odd, ghostly twin of Emilie Sagee. One of the most widely believed theories, however, is the theory of bilocation. By definition, Merriam-Webster defines bilocation as the state of being or ability to be in two places at the same time. Now, as bizarre and fantastical as this may sound, several instances of bilocation have in fact been reported, ranging throughout history and across many areas of the world. Most curiously, however, is the fact that bilocation has been mentioned in various faiths and religions, including but not limited to Catholicism, Christianity, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Countless priests, monks, and shamans have been known to use this ability, including one very famous example. Maria Fernandez Coronel, a Spanish nun who was an active member of the church in the early 1600s, reportedly had a very powerful ability to bilocate. Through her bilocation, she served as a Christian missionary in both Spain and early America, in what would be modern-day Texas and New Mexico. Despite never traveling to the American continent, Maria had been in contact with Native American tribes in these areas, mainly in efforts to spread the Christian faith in the New World. Both the natives and Spanish priests in the early southwestern United States confirmed being in her presence, despite Maria physically remaining in her home country of Spain, thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean. Over time, her bilocation earned her the legendary names of Lady in Blue and the Flying Nun, homages to her very mysterious ability. Apart from religion, other famous historical figures have been known to practice bilocation, one of which is the Greek mathematician and philosopher Pythagoras, who had been reportedly visiting the plazas of both Metapontum and Termination in modern-day Italy. Now, as a quick note for reference, these locations are at least a 5-hour drive apart by modern-day standards. However, residents living in both of these plazas claim to have had full conversations with Pythagoras, presumably on the same day at roughly the same time. Some sources reveal that Pythagoras was a man highly fascinated by mysticism. In fact, he had strong beliefs in the soul's process of reincarnation, claiming to have lived multiple lives. Apart from this, Pythagoras also claimed to have visited a world of spirits at some point in his life. Despite many examples of bilocation throughout history, Emilie Sagee's case has a very glaring difference. Unfortunately for Emilie, much unlike all the bilocators of the past, she experienced a large amount of negative symptoms, ranging from fatigue to illness. Likewise, it is also unknown as to whether these bilocation practitioners developed the skill, inherited the skill at birth, or were somehow granted the skill by divine means. One similarity in these instances of bilocation, however, is a common desire to help, mainly through the spreading of knowledge, faith, guidance, healing, and other services. Many theorize that Emilie Sagee perhaps unlocked her ability to bilocate completely by accident, a byproduct of her immense desire to be with her students, assisting them in every way and anywhere. Stemming from this theory, the illness and lethargy she experienced may have been a result of improper bilocation. Unaware and unable to channel her emotional, spiritual energy, her unintentional bilocation left her in poor physical condition, while her double remained active. While bilocation remains to be one of the most widely accepted theories regarding Emilie Sagee's ghostly double, there has been discussion on alternative explanations. One closely related theory is that of astral projection, defined as the ability of a person's spirit to travel to distant places. Much like bilocation, the ability of astral projection has been a very interesting yet highly debated ability that is still under investigation to this very day. Likewise, it also has heavy ties to various religions from around the world, including Hinduism, Chinese Taoism, various Native American beliefs, and the Western esoteric community. Traditionally, astral projection allows for one's soul to travel to new locations, most specifically, higher spiritual planes beyond the physical realm. By modern standards, astral projection has been categorized as an OBE, or out-of-body experience. However, unlike the concept of bilocation, many doctors and psychologists dismiss reports of astral projection, claiming them to be symptoms of mental ailments or cognitive dissociation. Unfortunately, in the case of Emilie Sagee, astral projection normally occurs when the practitioner is under a very specific physical state, typically during a session of meditation, hypnotism, or sleep. However, some practitioners claim that astral projection is possible while an individual is fully conscious and relaxed, which does make a very curious case for the famous sewing class incident tied to Emilie Sagee herself. Going off of this theory, if Emilie was in a very calm, peaceful state while tending to the flower garden, she may have allowed herself to astral project into the classroom itself. Much like bilocation, this likely occurred out of pure accident and without Emilie's awareness. As a final potential explanation regarding Emilie Sagee's ghostly double, there is one theory that some have proposed, despite being the least credible of the three proposed theories. With that said, some believe Emilie Sagee is haunted by a true ghostly twin. Unfortunately, this theory is very difficult to prove, given that we have no confirmed records of Emilie's family or her past. As a brief overview, this theory suggests that Emilie had either a sister or identical twin sister that at some point had passed away in Emilie's life. Given Emilie's resume, we could surmise that her sister died roughly in the early childhood or early teen years of Emilie's life. As a result, the spirit of her sister remained on Earth as a ghost, unintentionally haunting Emilie and following her throughout her adult life. In efforts to help Emilie with her career, or perhaps orchestrate a life she longed for, Emilie's ghostly twin sister mirrored Emilie's actions. On the day of the embroidery class incident, it is possible that Emilie's sister's ghost had gained enough strength to break away from Emilie. This allowed her to manifest a great distance away, while Emilie herself remained in the courtyard garden. Now, I do want to note that as complex or far-fetched as this theory may seem, there is some evidence that could actually point to this theory being plausible. Within paranormal communities and cultures around the world, it is widely known that contact between living people and ghostly entities can sometimes result in very harmful consequences, particularly for the individual. Ghosts have been said to sometimes disrupt or even consume spiritual energy within a living person, often using it to manifest in a way that is visible, audible, and potentially even tactile within the physical world. However, this does result in a wide variety of negative symptoms for the living person in the ghost's vicinity, including an onset of sudden weakness, dizziness, nausea, headaches, and other possible ailments. One very fervent group of believers in this phenomenon are the Navajo, a prominent native tribe based in North America. The phenomenon itself is more commonly referred to as ghost sickness. It is actually recognized as a real ailment in many indigenous cultures, spanning Eastern Asia and the Pacific Islands as well. By definition, ghost sickness occurs when a deceased spirit attaches to a living person, resulting in a very harmful energy drain. This could then cause damage to the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of the individual. Now, I also want to note that the ghost does not have to be a dark or malicious entity per se. The ghost simply needs to exist within very close proximity to the individual for a very long extended period of time, which in the case of Emilie Sagee is a very strong parallel. Looking further into the case of Emilie Sagee, these beliefs do align with her experiences in a very alarming way. During instances of her ghost twin's apparition, Emilie would experience the same problematic symptoms linked to ghost sickness, becoming extremely lethargic and mentally unfocused. The most concerning element of this argument, however, is the true identity of this supposed ghost. Could this ghost be of a lookalike sister that Emilie lost earlier in life? Or could this spirit be completely unrelated to Emilie herself? Perhaps this spirit wanted to act and appear as Emilie, trying to have some semblance of a normal life within the physical realm. Unfortunately, we can only speculate. Despite the existence of Emilie's ghostly twin being a huge mystery, a greater mystery does still remain. What exactly happened to Emilie Sagee? Most speculate that upon leaving the pensionnat, Emilie would abandon her career as a teacher altogether. Julie von Guldenstubbe, who reportedly became friends with Emilie prior to her termination, confirmed that Emilie had later moved in with her sister-in-law. Within her new home, she served as a tutor for her nieces and nephews, and given that Julie was able to visit Emilie at her sister-in-law's residence, she likely remained in Latvia at that time. Unfortunately, however, Julie would lose contact with Emilie Sagee during her final disappearance. Upon leaving her sister-in-law's place, some sources claim that she headed east, relocating to modern-day Russia. However, there is a possibility that Emilie could have attempted to head west, back to Dijon, France. Perhaps she was ready to leave her tumultuous last years in Latvia behind, hoping to return to her family. But several years later, her last place of residency remains unknown. Unfortunately, we have no further information on Emilie's personal life. If she ever returned to her profession as a teacher, if she ever got married and had a family, even the date of her death remains a mystery, with no known death certificate or final place of resting. Most importantly, we will never know what happened to her ghostly double, and whether or not its strange appearance continued beyond Emilie's experience at the Pensionnat boarding school in Latvia. Alright guys, and that is a wrap on the curious and creepy tale of teacher Emilie Sagee, and the mysterious ghostly twin that plagued her career. Overall, I hope you guys enjoy learning about the lore behind this odd case, while seeing the full speed build come to life. Now, unfortunately, given the circumstances, this build is not 100% accurate to the real location, given that all images of the pensionnat are not truly verified. However, I did try to take a lot of inspiration from the alleged photos, along with other images of schools taken from this time period. Just like always, this is still a no CC, no mod limited pack build that will be available on the Sims 4 gallery as well. I'll leave you guys now with the final lot specs, along with the cinematic shots of the build, so you can see how everything turned out in the end. And with that, this has been 𝗪𝗏𝗡𝗚 signing off. Thank you so much for watching, guys.